Our gospel text this morning comes from Matthew, the 23rd chapter, verses 1 through 12. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore do whatever they teach you and follow it. But do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others. But they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, because you have one teacher and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted." Growing up as I did in the 1960s and 1970s, I saw a lot of protest buttons. You remember protest buttons. You attached one to the front of your fringed leather vest, that all the world might read the pithy sentiment scribed upon it. And one button pretty much summed up the era in 2 words: question authority. A friend from that era told me that he had not only carried that sentiment into adulthood, but taught it to his children: question authority, unfortunately forgetting that he and his wife were the authority. Authority can be hard to bear. People in authority are expected to have the answer, but they don't, not always. And when they do, the answer is not always popular. The greater one's authority, the greater the possibilities for disappointing someone. Our 18th century brother, Leonard Dober, figured that out, which, as you may have read in your bulletins this morning, is why he was eager to lay down the authority of chief elder that had been assigned to him. And yet, as hard as it is to bear, authority is precious. People who have it usually fear losing it. Those who do question authority usually wind up in trouble. Often they wind up silenced. Now, if you look at the Matthew text that we've been reading recently, you realize we've spent some weeks meditating on authority. The meditation began with events right after Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. When he entered the temple, says Matthew in the 21st chapter, the chief priests and the elders came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" Now, generally, people ask those questions when their own authority is being challenged. And boy, did Jesus bring the challenge. In Matthew's gospel, the first thing he does upon arriving in Jerusalem is come in the temple and start turning over tables of the money changers, challenging the economic authority of the day. And soon after, he relates a series of parables that shed unflattering light on the authority of the chief priests and the Pharisees. And then he skillfully evades their efforts to entrap him in an error that they hope will silence him and cause the crowd to withdraw the authority that they are vesting in him. In last week's text, we saw Jesus vanquish the challengers with answers so apt, says the text, that from that day no one dared to ask him any more questions. And at the end of that battle, in today's text, Jesus turns to the crowds, including his disciples, and tells them where true authority lies. Authority is not in the people who oppress, laying on others conditions that they will not bear themselves. Authority is not in the people who flaunt its symbols. Authority is not in the well-connected and the well-seated. Society attempts to convey authority through titles. But Jesus makes it clear that no matter how many people we label with titles like my great master, rabbi, or father, or teacher, labeling them as great or powerful or knowledgeable does not give them authority, because true authority belongs to God alone. If you look up the word authority, and you know I did, you'll find that it has more than one meaning. Yes, it does mean power, that authority that we afford to people in charge. And frankly, that kind of authority does need to be questioned and tested and sometimes cleared away in order to open to us new ways of thinking and living and even worshiping. All religious reform begins with the questioning of authority. But look at the word authority. It comes from author. The first meaning of authority is not power, but creator, parent, source. What do you do to show people you didn't just make something up? You cite authority. You cite the source. Of course, God is the sole authority. God is the creator, the parent, the source of everything. Where else then would we look for the authority to lead our church than the authority of God, resting in the Son, Jesus Christ, Messiah? This was the realization of our 18th century church, that no one but Christ could possibly hold the post of chief elder. No one else had the authority, because no one else is the source. But Jesus' authority is not expressed in power or in privilege or in symbols or in titles. Jesus says it here, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. The lesson we take from the authority of our chief elder is humility, the willingness to submit to one another and to God, the willingness to listen to one another, sincerely believing that another's idea may be as good as one's own, and another's pain is as important as one's own. But also the willingness to admit that we have pain and to weep in front of one another. Humility is the willingness to be grateful for the gift of life, which we know we did not create on our own. It is also the willingness to accept that we, like our poor old 18th century brother Leonard Dober, cannot handle the work of God, the work of the church, on our own, but must be shored up and supported by one another, and together be guided by our chief elder. He it is who is source, authority. He it is who humbled himself the most and was therefore exalted the highest. He it is who calls us to this sacrament of Holy Communion, this outward and visible sign of his inward and spiritual grace. He it is, Jesus Christ, who as head of the church lives and reigns now and forever. Amen.